Okay, hello everyone. So my name is, oops, it's already finished, nice. So my name is Spyros, and I'm going to talk to you about our joint work with Nicholas Boukoros, Stefan Bauregger, and Stefan Katzenbeiser, which is called Two is Not Enough, Privacy Assessment of Aggregation Schemes in Smart Metering. So before we talk about smart meters, let's talk about traditional power grids. So in a traditional power grid, you have the power plant that's producing the energy, and through its infrastructure, it goes to the end consumers. And periodically, someone comes to your place, checks your metering, and they charge you accordingly. Now, the smart grid is a highly sophisticated power grid that allows the constant monitoring of energy demand of every household, of every building in the network. And we do so because we need to be able to predict future demand, so actually we don't produce more energy that we actually need, because actually this is more environmental friendly. Also, we have reduced energy production cost, and also we can actually reduce the cost for end consumers. And actually, we have this idea of smart metering by installing in our houses and our buildings some devices which are called smart meters. So the smart meters are some devices that we plug in our electrical infrastructures, and in specific intervals in times, every second, every 15 minutes, every 30 minutes, depending on the nature of the smart meter, report the values back to the provider. So the provider can actually see in real time, or in almost real time, the energy demands for a whole area, for a whole geographical area. So actually, the provider having access to these intervals in time and our energy in these intervals in time can construct what we call our daily load profile. So this is an example load profile, and actually, as you can see, it's a time series. So if the smart meter reports the values back in specific intervals, he can know actually our energy demands and the duration of a whole day. And what you see here is like, on the x-axis, you see the time of the day, which is 24 hours. On the y-axis, you see the power demand for this specific household, for this specific smart meter, the power demand in specific intervals. And you can see that actually in this load profile, which I remind you is for 24 hours, we can find specific devices running in this profile. And we know that these are specific devices because we know from energy disaggregation research that specific devices leave specific patterns of the load profile. So if someone has access to your load profile, it can tell a lot of things about you. It can tell when you are at home, what kind of devices do you use, and actually if the intervals that the smart meter provides data back to the providers is really frequent, it can even tell what kind of movies do you watch on your TV. So actually you see that the provider can learn a lot of things about you. Luckily, we have many clever solutions, especially from the pet community and the other like security and privacy communities that actually implement the so-called privacy-preserving smart metering. However, in this talk, we're going to talk about a family of solutions, which is the aggregation scheme, which we believe is a very prominent solution and has also been proposed as the way to go by a European Union expert group. And the idea is rather simple. So instead of reporting individual meterage from individual households, you just aggregate them together and you report just the aggregate back. And to make things more clear, let's see a silly example. So you see here different smart meters that we have them in groups of 3. So instead of reporting the value back to the energy supplier, actually the smart meters in groups of 3, they report their values every fixed interval to an aggregation unit, and the aggregation unit just aggregates those values and reports only the aggregated back to the energy provider. So the energy provider can construct a daily load profile for 3 smart meters and not for 1. So likely, actually, what everyone is doing in his house is being, if you want, hidden in the aggregate. Again, you can instantiate these aggregation units by trusted third parties, or ideally, like we have seen, again, very clever solutions. You can do some kind of magic crypto between the smart meters, so you can have security proof that all the operation is secure, and actually, it can also be securely transmitted to the energy provider. However, the energy provider needs to see the results in plain text, because he needs to have some utility. He needs to be able to read these things and make predictions. So actually, we see that the security problem is pretty much solved. However, there's a minor detail. And the detail is like, what is the minimum amount of households necessary in the aggregations to offer privacy? There has been a report that has been going around for a couple of years now from an industrial body that says that actually an aggregation level of 2 is adequate to offer privacy. And actually, we decided to test this result. So in order to test which aggregation sizes are enough for privacy, we need to define a privacy metric. And actually, following the steps of Bolli et al., we base our metric on the notion of indistinguishability. We're going to measure, we're going to say if someone is distinguishable or indistinguishable in the aggregate. And actually, we're going to see how we can play indistinguishability game by defining a weak adversarial model, and we're actually a very weak adversary. So actually, we define a privacy game in the form of a cryptographic game, and let's see what's happened. So actually, we have an adversary and a challenger that they agree on a specific dataset because we evaluate over real datasets. They agree on a dataset. They agree on a size M, which is like the size of the aggregation that we test, like 2 smart meters, 3 smart meters, 1 million smart meters, depends. And also they agree on this parameter L, which is the length of the daily load profile, like how long should the profile last. And actually those profiles, unless I state otherwise, should be 24 hours, like daily load profiles. So actually the adversary goes to the dataset and randomly selects two buildings. And from those two buildings, randomly selects one day of each of the buildings, so he has two daily load profiles. So he has those two profiles and he sends them to the challenger. So the challenger randomly selects one of the two. And he actually goes and selects randomly m-1 other buildings, and from those buildings selects one day for each building. So he creates the aggregate using those m-1 other daily profiles and putting inside the aggregate one of the two that the adversary sent him. So once he actually sums everything together, he sends them back to the adversary, and now the adversary knows the two daily profile that he selected randomly and the aggregate. And his task is very simple. He has to tell us if E0 or E1 is inside the aggregate. So our methodology is the following. So we play the game many times and we measure the average adversarial advantage of a random guessing, like how much better can you do than by randomly saying that E0 or E1 is in the aggregate. And we rely on very, very simple heuristics to actually attack the aggregation sizes. So actually we rely on some simple peak comparison. We just count the peaks between the two load profiles in the aggregate, and whichever has the same, like the most common peaks actually wins. We rely on mean square error and Pearson correlation taken all over the body of the time series of the load profile. And also we actually rely on a combined method. And for the biggest part of the paper, we rely on this because it heavily outperforms the others. That actually is based on peak comparison. So we find the peaks in the two daily load profiles, and we find the peaks in the aggregate. And we also take the correlation for a time window around the peak. And actually we evaluate over the largest available datasets that we could find. So let's talk about the following cases. Like, let's see if in small aggregation sizes, actually we can distinguish daily load profiles or not. And then let's make the game a little bit more narrow, and let's see if we can distinguish specific devices in the aggregate or not, and we will see how actually we modify our game for this. And then we'll talk about some parameters that heavily affect our game. So going to some results, we're going to see if small aggregations are privacy preserving. And to remind you, industrial report says that actually aggregation size of 2 is adequate to offer privacy. So what we see here, we have used the Dataport dataset, which was the largest dataset available to us, that has 15 minutes resolutions, which means every smart meter reports the values back to the provider every 15 minutes. So we actually play the game for different aggregation sizes, and here we plot the average adversarial advantage of random guessing, with 1 means that actually the adversary is always able to distinguish between two profiles, and 0 means that the best he can do is actually randomly tell us one of the two. So actually we see, and here we see with 4 different line colors or line shapes, that our 4 heuristics and how they perform. So actually in small aggregation sizes, we see that actually all of the heuristics are able to tell us which one of the two profiles is inside. We have a really high adversarial advantage, which means small aggregation sizes, at least less than 10, do not offer privacy. However, again, if the aggregation sizes go to 50, which is actually a magnitude of order larger than 2, we can still have significant advantage using our combined method, which I remind you is a very, very simple heuristic. It's not machine learning, it's just some kind of very simple heuristics. However, these results are only for one dataset. Let's see what happens with different datasets, because we had some other datasets that had different geographical origin, which means people live in different climates, they might be using different devices. We had different amount of households, different amount of load profiles per household, and also sometimes different types of energy measured. So here we work with multiple datasets which have 30-minute resolution, because in order to be able to compare everything, we need to have the same resolution, which means all of the smart meters in all datasets should send the data back to the provider at the same intervals. So we actually compare our 3 datasets, again with aggregation size and the adversarial advantage, and we see that in small aggregation sizes, actually, we don't have privacy. The adversarial advantage is rather high, and here I show you the results already from the combined method, because it heavily outperforms the other. But then again, in larger aggregations, actually this advantage doesn't drop significantly. We still can distinguish at some point if E0 or E1 is in the aggregate. However, 2, 5, 10, or even 30 are pretty much small aggregation size. Let's see what happens in really, really large aggregations. So using our Dataport dataset going back to 15 minutes resolution, we create really large aggregations, like aggregations in the terms of hundreds of households in the aggregate. And M here actually is the aggregation size, like here you see 258, and delta is the adversarial advantage. And you see actually here there's a point out of which in a specific data set the adversarial advantage doesn't change that much, no matter how many households more do I put in the aggregate. However, actually, one could argue that this is a very sweet spot for privacy. However, we cannot conclude upon a sweet spot because actually this heavily depends on the data set, and actually larger aggregations introduce a lot of noise to our game. And also, actually, we need more research in the direction of utility versus privacy, because yes, you can have aggregation sizes of, let's say, 1,000 households. However, the provider actually should be able to do some kind of prediction based on this aggregate. And if you cannot do this, actually, this whole smart metering idea is just a waste of time and money for them. So actually, we saw that small aggregation sizes are not enough to offer privacy to individuals. Let's see what happened with single appliances. So we modify our game in a little bit, and instead of playing the game using two daily load profiles from two different households, we keep the same daily profile from the same house, and we artificially plug in one device running. And here we see the result for 4 devices. Actually, again, the adversarial task is to tell us if he is able to distinguish between the two profiles, which actually means if he is able to find this device running in the aggregate or not. So you see in small aggregation size, I can have a high adversarial advantage, which means the adversary is able to actually find the device most of the time. However, this advantage here drops dramatically as the aggregation sizes grow larger. Actually, energy-hungry appliances, as you might guess, are much easier to detect. And you can find a list with more devices, around 20 in the paper, and also you can find figures regarding correlation between device characteristics and detectability, like how specific device characteristics, such as the running time or the energy output per peak that the machine is created, affect detectability. Actually, there's one parameter that heavily affects our game besides the size of the aggregation, and that is the tempo resolution. Like how often does the smart meter report the values back to the provider? And actually, to remind you, actually note here that the industrial report says that actually a very good size for tempo resolution should be 15 or 30 minutes. So we actually plot with different lines, different aggregation sizes, ranging from 2 to 50, and we actually plot the different tempo resolutions. So you see actually for the aggregation size of 2, even when the tempo resolution is 360, actually we can still have significant adversarial advantage. However, this is not true for larger aggregations in less frequent reports. So you see actually that less frequent reports are more private. So to summarize things, actually small aggregations cannot guarantee privacy either for individual profiles or for single appliances. And actually an upper limit of privacy seems to exist. However, it heavily depends on the dataset used. And also we need more research regarding privacy versus meaningful utility. And actually one parameter that heavily affects privacy in smart meters besides the aggregation size is the tempo resolution. Like how often does the smart meters report the values back to the provider? Also, in the paper, you can find some other exciting things, such as like if there's a universal load profile, like if buildings around the world behave similarly. You can find actually how we also can use our indistinguishability game to build a membership disclosure game, where actually the adversary has to tell us if one profile is inside the aggregate or not, and not distinguish between the two, and why actually this is a much harder game to win. However, the main takeaway point should be that 2 or just a few households forming an aggregate is definitely not enough for privacy. And with this, I would like to conclude my talk. And yeah, thank you very much for your attention.